Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices to Modernize in Multi-Cloud, How to Avoid the Pitfalls of DIY or Managed Services. Thank you so much for joining us. This event is brought to you in partnership with Taos and produced by Actual Tech Media. We've got a great discussion lined up for you here on the webinar today. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we want to help to get all your questions answered around multi-cloud. Before you get started, you should know my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm glad to be serving as your moderator. Like I said, we want this to be educational. We want to help get your questions answered. Multi-cloud is a bit of a confusing topic today, I know, for many companies out there, but rest assured we've got solutions on this special webinar event. We encourage your questions there in the questions panel of your audience console, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. So keep those questions coming. We also have our best question prize that is designed to help encourage some questions. If you have a question on your mind, I'll be talking about the best question prize here in just a moment. Before I do, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a special paper on how to convince your CFO growth and value starts here by Taos. So make sure that you check that out. There's also a link there to taos.com for additional information on what Taos can do to help you with your enterprise IT challenges, especially around multi-cloud. We also have our Amazon $300 gift card prize. I'll be announcing the winner of that at the end of the webinar on the live event. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The full prize terms and conditions for that drawing can be found there in the Handouts tab. And then finally, we have what I mentioned earlier, the best question prize for an additional $50 Amazon gift card. Prize winners for this will be selected after the webinar and contacted via email. And you also must meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy. So if you have a question, and who doesn't have a question really around multi-cloud, this is a great event to get those questions answered. Now, before I introduce you to our three expert presenters, I want to first ask you a question out there in the audience. I've just brought up a poll question on the screen. A simple three answer question here, three possible answers. Where are you in your cloud journey? Where are you in the journey to the cloud? Are you just getting started? Are you started, but it's kind of stalled, not quite sure what you're going to do? Or maybe you're just stuck. We want to hear your feedback on this, and I'll actually be sharing the results of this here in just a moment, as soon as we get a response from the majority of the audience. We'll also have another poll question at the end of our discussion today while we do our Q&A. So we appreciate your responses to these types of polls. It helps us to know, where you are and what you're interested in and what's going on in your IT organization. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback. Let me share the results now. And as you can see, it looks like roughly 64% said they're just getting started in their journey to the cloud. 29% have started, but they feel like they're really stalled in that journey. And then 6% just really feel like they're stuck. So, no matter where you are in the journey to the cloud, we've got some great discussion, and I think you're going to learn a lot on the webinar today. And with that, it's now time to introduce you to our three expert panelists. I'm excited to be bringing on in just a moment here, Patty Shrum, Senior Vice President of Managed Services at Taos, Mr. James Evans, Cloud Resale Manager at Taos, and Tim Clark, Senior Principal Solutions Architect. It's great to have our experts from Taos on the event today. Now let's go ahead and turn on our video and bring up the live stream here and chat about best practices to modernize in multi-cloud. I'm excited to kick off our discussion here with our experts from Taos. Before we do, it's important to note that multi-cloud offers so many benefits, and that's why many companies out there are choosing to leverage the power of a multi-cloud design when they modernize their IT infrastructure. But along with that, there must be some challenges as well. And that brings me to my first question. So, what are the challenges that enterprises are facing as they move through their journey into multi cloud? Patty?
Thanks, David. That is a great question. So, a lot of our customers will come to us just trying to decide whether to use a single cloud solution or use a multi cloud strategy. And some of the things that drive that multi cloud strategy discussion can be, what should I put where? Identify which workloads are best fit for each cloud provider because they will all be a little different. So it can also be about availability and uptime and the requirements that they may have to run their business. So keep in mind, companies will have very specific SLAs around availability. And those requirements could be greater than one single cloud provider can provide. So it could really push the conversation into more of a, you might need a multi-cloud solution. So a multi-cloud strategy can also really be a challenge when you're looking for disaster recovery. So we've seen customers that maybe are using a single cloud solution for their primary cloud, but are really looking at that multiple cloud solution to really impact their DR process, and that can really protect them against any one cloud failure from a single provider. Also determining if they're in over their heads. Have they gone through the cloud journey? In some cases, they've identified their strategy, they've gone through the migration, but what they find is maybe they're still running too long on a hybrid platform, meaning still maybe in the data center, still in a cloud. So we can usually help kind of identify where are those bottlenecks, what's keeping you from really being able to get to that next place. And if they don't have the ability to figure it out, obviously, getting help for somebody to come in and really help them get to what that is that's impacting their business because they have these challenges can also be a challenge they face. The next key point is really security. And security is top of mind for all of our customers. We hear it all day, every day. And in most cases, it's really the thing you should think of first. And so when we talk to customers or we hear those questions, it's, how can I make sure my data is safe? How do I make sure that, do I know what data I actually have in the cloud? And what if my data is subject to regulatory compliance? So I always have to be thinking about that. So in a multi-cloud environment, we want to just ensure that our organizations are really following those best practices. And sometimes the challenge may be they're not sure what that is. And so they need some help in determining, how do I make sure that I am following those best practices? And then really just making sure that if you are running in a hybrid environment, that you understand if your data is secure when it's maybe moving between your hybrid environment and a cloud provider.
Great points there all around. And I especially honed in there on the security point, that security should come first. I mean, security is in the news constantly these days, and we hear a lot of concerns around, cloud security. I think a lot of us assume that public clouds are just inherently secure. What's your take on that, Patty?
Well, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. We hear the same concerns. So really, all the cloud providers have security and tools. So they have something in place that's going to protect their services. But it's really up to you to ensure that you've implemented the proper protocols and solutions to secure your data. And in a multi-cloud environment, it may be a little more complex. So you really may need to understand that there's a level of security that could be need to be customized. And so I'd love to hear from Tim Clark, who it has some specialization in this area and sees a lot of these concerns from our customers. So Tim, love to turn it over to you and just have you talk to us about what you hear and what you know about this topic.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Patty. As you mentioned, we try to focus on integrating the security, compliance, and governance aspects of the business objectives and integrate that day one. When organizations or companies kind of lay security as an afterthought, that complicates the overall design. And in some cases, you have to refactor that design to mitigate any type of vulnerabilities or any security issues you may run into. When you start talking in multi-cloud scenarios, each individual hyperscaler or cloud platform provider has a specific way that they manage the data, the user accounts, the entitlement, and the management of that infrastructure. So understanding what the governance and compliance requirements of the business are, not the technical aspects, but of how they actually solicit the data, manage the data, transport the data, integrate the data with their application needs to be understood. And then each individual component within those concepts need to be addressed. So when you focus primarily on the perimeter, so to speak, across a multi-cloud environment, you've built the wall, but you have not secured the internal workings of that environment. So when we meet with clients and try to understand their business objectives, we focus on things like, how do you transport your data? How is that accessed? Is that data need to be encrypted at rest? How do you solicit the data and then transport the results from that solicitation back to your end user? So when we meet with a client to understand their business objectives, the idea is to not just to give them a best practices approach on how to migrate or utilize the cloud, but to better effectively secure the environment and meet the business objectives in the same case. When we talk about integrating the application at a secure platform, what I mean by that is, what does this application do? What's its function? What vulnerabilities does that application may have? How does it access an external component outside of the cloud platform? Securing those environments and understanding how that data is transported between inside the cloud as well as outside the cloud, and then the interdependencies between the various cloud hyperscalers needs to be identified, and something that Taos actually we work on almost on a daily basis is to secure those platforms effectively.
Fascinating, Tim. So if I hear things right, it sounds like some things are really more complicated and maybe even a little convoluted than meets the eyes. So what do you advise here? What should customers do? Should they try doing this on their own, or what?
That's a great question. If you have limited experience with cloud, it's easy to get into the cloud. It's easy to migrate and function within the cloud environment. But partnering with a company like Taos, we have got a lot of experience and also a lot of, I would say, past bad experiences that we've run in with clients, and then we share that with our clients to have more impact to their infrastructure and design of their application. So using somebody that's kind of had the tried and true methodology and have known the worn path of developing an infrastructure, that's where Taos can kind of come in.
Absolutely. I mean, that's so critical. Avoiding past pitfalls. We don't want to have to go down the same path
Right.
that others might have run into in terms of getting into trouble. So we talked a little bit about regulatory compliance. I'm curious, what's new for data around this area that customers really need to keep in mind?
I would say anything that's related to PII, GDPR, how you actually download data, how people ingest data, how do you solicit and process that data, and then provision or make it available to the rest of the organization. So if you gather a bunch of behavioral metrics for a particular service, how that data is actually acquiesced, shared, and provided in that means of not only to yourself, the people that work within an organization, and also secure that information. So most users now have been through, are familiar with online services, and they want their data protected. So when I share my personal information to a particular provider or some type of application or service, there's certain information I don't want to share with the rest of the environment or the rest of the world, so to speak. So we build platforms, and I would say in some cases silos, to deprecate the say personal data, encrypt it so it's not available to the common user. So most of the information or most of the compliance aspect are related to the personal information related to each individual and how to secure those platforms and those identities in fortitude.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. Protecting personal information. Great point. So, I mean, thinking about this and just listening to this conversation, I'm starting to think that maybe companies should hand over all of their cloud workloads to maybe a managed service provider or MSP and really spare themselves some of these headaches. Patty, what are your thoughts on that?
If you decide to engage with a managed services provider, my thoughts are look for a partner. Look for a partner that can become an extension of your team. And that partner should be really smart about your business. And they should bring thought leadership, they should bring expertise and depth with their support model. So your partner should really participate in knowledge sharing as part of their model with your teams. They should also, establishing that strong partnership can also open up your talent to be able to work on strategic projects that are maybe more revenue impacting. And then you can go to bed every night knowing that operations is in good hands. A great managed services partner should improve your operational efficiencies. They should, they'll be utilizing cloud native services. So a couple examples of that is patching and backup management, which we all, have to do on a daily basis, becomes quite optimized and builds that efficiency where you no longer have to worry about that. So I am very passionate about the partnership and finding a good partner, and that would be my best recommendation is make sure that your partner really understands your business model and can come in and really bring that leadership into your strategy and ultimately what your organization is trying to achieve.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you, Patty. And I like the point you made about helping the company focus on revenue generating activities, because that's what they need to be doing. So let's now talk for a second about the DIY approach. And I'm curious to hear from Tim and James on your perspective. What successes and struggles have you seen when working with customers?
I've seen the struggle quite a bit of the lack of readiness. Basically, if you're coming from an on-prem environment, you're used to, you have some assumptions when you move into the cloud that it's basically going to be like managing on-prem. So they kind of step into that, and that's the same thing for multi-cloud, right? You might have some experience with AWS or Azure or GCP, but that experience does not translate well. There are specific things, like for instance, I can give GCP as an example. When you stand up a VM, you can't just go add an extra network adapter. You have to completely destroy the VM and rebuild it, which, there's some challenges, and each cloud has its own unique behavior and flavor. And so, those stepping into it with assumptions, I think, stalls projects. So, you get into these projects, you're unprepared for them, and you have to sit back and research. So it can be slow moving. And I think that the stalled projects and missed deadlines also, greatly influences the impression people have of going multi-cloud. And then, of course, that also dovetails right into, the lack of skills. You have somebody that's really skilled in something, and the skills just don't translate. I think that it's really important to be prepared to do the research to know which cloud you're going to go to, and make sure that you skill up for that. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think that's a really good point. Another case or pitfalls a lot of companies run into is with the advent of the cloud, the mechanical components within the legacy data center are no longer part of the equation. So a lot of times we run into organizations or companies that want to do what we consider a lift and shift, where they replicate their legacy data center environment into the cloud. The problem with that practice is that you're not taking full advantage of the services that are provided by the various hyperscalers, and you end up building kind of a monolithic environment that does not necessarily consume or utilize the services provided. So you don't have the scaling, you don't have the security. You're basically taking your exact replica and moved it in the cloud. So it does function in the cloud, but it may not function as effectively as you could. You also find that you deal with a lot of cost issues when you move in that type of a practice where you're actually spending more money than you need to, and you don't take advantage of the elastic or contracting abilities or functionality within the cloud. Also, when you partnership with somebody like Taos, effectively you can understand the application architecture and maybe utilize services that you're not aware of because you're not as fundamentally familiar with the cloud platform itself. But by and large, most of the issues we see is, to James' point, is underestimating the skills that are necessary to migrate to the cloud, as well as being able to understand and know of the available services that are available to you.
So let me ask a question here. If an organization starts with a multi-cloud or cloud DIY initiative and then they run into problems, is it too late for them to work with a business partner to recover, Patty?
Never. Never too late. So Taos teams have in-depth experience, and they can really come in with an experience to assess where you are. What do you need? What do you need to move forward? Do you need to build plans for success? Do you need a new strategy? We could even sit down and really realign that strategy with you. And then at the end of the day, a good partner should also be able to run it. So maybe you got into this because, as the guys were saying, that maybe you just didn't necessarily have the skills you needed to take you where you needed to be. Well, that could resolve in not also being able to run it. Once you've implemented it, can you run it? So I think that no matter where you are in that journey, you should be able to bring a partner in at any place. We have a lot of experience kind of stepping in various aspects of those journeys, and really being able to kind of meet them anywhere and sit back. And I always say, take a seat at the table, shoulder to shoulder, understand where are you at, what do you need next, and then ultimately kind of get in front of where they are seeing those unforeseen problems that they hadn't planned for. So I think it's important that, know when is the right time to bring them in, or just bring them in when you get to a point and you say, we think we got to have some help at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stepping in to save the day. I like that thought there. Let's talk for a moment about cost. I mean, can adopting a multi-cloud strategy be cost efficient if carried out correctly, James?
I do believe so. I mean, a lot of companies have found that moving to the cloud has not always resulted in lower costs. Basically, the flexibility to spin up new infrastructure without any type of planning, can suddenly have a lot of cost overrun. You're used to having preparing ahead of time, like when in the old on-prem scenario where it's kind of like, oh, I can go spin up a VM with however much resources I want. But you still have to plan for your capacity, and it's kind of fixed and it's stable for a little bit. When it comes to the cloud, you just, the sky is your oyster. You can just spin up as much as you want. So, you need to have some some controls over that. Cost management platform is a great tool for that. And what I'd recommend for that is something that's agnostic, meaning you can go look at your cloud's expenses running, whether or not it's AWS, GCP, or Azure, and have it in a single pane of glass so that you can understand where your costs are going. Each cloud does have its own ability to go in, but, you have to begin to understand that for each cloud, having that specific cloud knowledge and going and looking into it. And it doesn't quite give you the whole picture. You're popping all over the place, and maybe you go gather it and you got to put it into a spreadsheet, and it's painful. So that's one place that I do it. Another place is to automate your IT policies. Go ahead and shut down workloads when they're not needed. Policies for your dev environments. They spin up resources only when they're active during development. Maybe go ahead and shut them down during non-work hours. you do a little bit of analysis, make sure you're right sizing your workloads. You know, when you first move to the cloud, you know, it's just typically a lift and shift, but you got to make sure that you're sizing the right amount of CPU and the right amount of memory, and then your costs can come down a little bit right there. Utilize your provider discounts. Go ahead and research those. You know, things like purchasing reserved instances, great way to save some money right there. Can drastically reduce your cost. And that, you know, that goes more for a legacy infrastructure, you know, for the always on VM, real great there. You can price regions, you know, for different regions have different pricing. Also great research to look into. It's much cheaper to run offshore also. And then another thing I want to mention is storage. Make sure you go ahead, and storage can sometimes sit there. You have some snapshots that are accumulating and just sitting there. You know, snapshot management, go delete those unused snapshots. If there's storage that's stale, go ahead and move it, maybe move it off to slower storage, like Amazon's Glacier, for instance, if it's not active. And then modernize your applications, you know, to make use of things like auto scaling instead of like, you know, that was what built Amazon, right? Only use the workloads that you need for the time when you need them, and then scale down, get rid of them. And then make use of native cloud features as much as possible. Move away from infrastructure as a service. You know, if you can make use of those cloud features, absolutely. And then if you haven't already, modernize your process to maybe use Agile or DevOps.
It sounds like a ton of great tips there to help companies make multi-cloud cost efficient and affordable. So thank you. Taos obviously has a lot of insight and wisdom on that topic. You mentioned DevOps, and so we frequently hear about DevOps. I'm curious, why is that so significant for modernization in multi-cloud, Tim?
Yeah, so a lot of times clients will come to us and say, you know, I need DevOps. I want to integrate DevOps with my team, or to help improve our reliability, we need DevOps. It's that kind of common, you know, I would say contextual language is used. And what we tell clients is DevOps is a culture. It basically has, you know, there is technical aspects to it, but by and large, we try to get teams to collaborate effectively to understand and convey information and strategies across the entire enterprise. When you're speaking about or working towards a multi-cloud scenario, having teams be able to inherently utilize the same methodology, you may have different components or technical solutions behind that, but a same common theme of how you deploy, manage, administer, or in some case, just consume the services within the cloud. So for example, when I deploy containers to GCP, and James deploys containers to AWS, we have a common shared identity management framework that inherently allows for me to authorize, for me to do my jobs the way that I need to, and James has the ability to do his job the way that he has to. But from the end user perspective, it all looks the same. DevOps allows for people to basically remove the silos within enterprise and develop a basically common theme and practice and a collaboration or shared knowledge base. DevOps also allows for, or the culture allows for you to inherently take more accountability on the development of your applications. So things like when you provide or build something, artifact, widget, application, service, what have you, you build a little more maturity in the way that you test that application, verify that application, validate the code for security vulnerabilities, integrate with other applications that may be integrated in your portfolio, and develop a more seamless, or I would say more mature product at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, DevOps is not just a technological solution, but it's also a cultural shift. So you are no longer just building your application and shifting it off to the operations team. You and the operations team are working as a single vertical and developing a product and an infrastructure that's tightly integrated for a more reliable and some would say a more quality focused application.
Excellent. I like that. The DevOps is a culture. It's not a product that you put in. So thank you for your insight on that. I want to now ask a final question to each of you, and that's just for your advice for customers out there on how they can take a lower risk path and avoid the pitfalls that we've been talking about when planning their journey to multi-cloud? Patty?
Thanks, David. Yeah, absolutely. There are several promising approaches. I think you've heard a lot of that today as we've gone through each of these questions. So I think the most important one is have a plan. Have a plan or a strategy. Know what direction you're going in. Have a good understanding of your business objectives. Really know what's the goal at the end. If you're going to take a cloud first strategy, if you are, what does that mean exactly? And understand what that objective is going to be. And really take a vendor neutral approach and use what cloud best fits the workloads you need. And then, really understanding if you don't have the ability to do it internally, do you bring a partner in? And if you bring a partner, I think we've given you some good ideas of maybe what to look for, but know when it is the right time to think about that strategy as well throughout your planning sessions. So James, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would go ahead and add on to that. Make sure the training is there. Provide training to your staff. I mean, if you do have to bring in a vendor and partner, that's great. Staff, you can build a synergy with the staff there. If the vendor or the partner can come in and help you with that. Absolutely fantastic. I think also building a kind of a cloud agnostic approach, from the beginning. For instance, using Terraform, for instance, you can go for an agnostic approach instead of saying using GCP's cloud build approach, or going ahead and using ARM templates in Azure. If you've got your pipelines in your development platform more agnostic, it's more portable, and to make proper selection of tools in advance and a methodology that aligns with that. I'd also say start with security in mind. We talked a little bit about security today. Security is absolutely important, and each of the clouds have different strategies when it comes to security. I mean, some things are standard for an IT industry, making sure your ports are secured, putting firewalls in place, but each of the clouds have some different feature sets when it comes to security, and probably, picking the right cloud that's going to have those security features that you're looking for. Absolutely. But, also making sure that you have a good IAM policy, rights and roles and responsibilities, having that well defined so that as you move into it, that's not a concern. It's actually part of your process moving from the beginning. And then automation. I talked about automation earlier, and Tim was great about DevOps. But modernizing your tools and your applications to the most current tool set, and actually, taking advantage of what the cloud really is about. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, no, thanks, James. I'd like to circle back to what Patty said. Understanding your business objectives, I think, is key. And it's not just, we want to generate more revenue. It could be, we want to improve our data analytics platform. We want to reduce the defects in our current application bugs. We want to have better utilization on our web layer. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? And when you run in or want to move towards a multi-cloud scenario, you may look at utilizing GCP's BigQuery platform for your data analytics component, but then you may look at AWS again for maybe your web layer, and then you might build a CI/CD pipeline within AWS for all your product deliverable that feeds the behavior analytics to GCP. So going in with a plan, or at least understanding what your business objectives are, and then getting very granular at not just at the enterprise infrastructure level, but at the application level as well. And then you could be able to determine, this particular service will probably be better served in GCP as opposed to AWS. These scenarios also allow for you to also take advantage of some of the cost optimization within each platform. So I think, to James and Patty's point, understanding what it is you want to do just from a business perspective, not the technological answer, but what is your business trying to accomplish? And then looking at the various cloud platforms and then devising a very deep, I would say, structured program of how to apply the specific or explicit services provided by the hyperscalers and how they can be consumed for you.
Excellent advice all around. Thank you so much, Patty, Tim, and James. I learned so much here about the best practices for modernization and avoiding pitfalls with multi-cloud. And now we're going to go into our Q&A session and take questions from our audience. All right, excellent discussion there. Thank you so much to the entire Taos team. We've now brought up our poll question that says, what additional information would you like about the Taos solution? And I'll leave that up for everyone out there in the audience to respond to. We do appreciate your response there to the poll. And we'll be taking your questions now. Don't forget about the best question prize as well that we're running on the event today. If you have a question in your mind that you're not sure if you should answer, now's the time to get it in. So I'll start off with the first question here from Michael, who says, along the lines of encryption and regulatory compliance, what provisions can be made for testing the immutability of database backups and even protecting code in DevOps? Who wants to take that one?
I can take that one. That's a great question. Immutable databases were kind of a best practice, but they're kind of a must-have in today's world. Encrypting the database or the immutable database schema itself is almost mandatory with any type of infrastructure or any type of application design. In this question here, this is a great question. A lot of clients ask this, and what we advise clients to do is in their delivery or any CD pipeline, integrate some type of immutable backup test. This would be the decryption of that data set and that schema, and implement that into that application. This aligns with any type of feature development that you may have, and also gives you just in case kind of test on your restore functionality around that immutable database. When talking about securing the actual code base itself, depending on where your source code is actually, if it's in Git, if it's an enterprise version, if it's a public version, etc., managing the entitlement, who has access to that environment, diminishing any type of passwords, any type of access, any type of authorization of the APIs, and if you have to, encrypting that information as well, depending on how you set your source code management or platform up. Essentially kind of is where that all lies. But to speak directly at the immutable database backup solution, encrypting the data, test on a regular basis, make it part of your code pipeline and delivery cycle, and just to give you basically a test bed to even verify that that data set is accurate.
Excellent advice. Thank you, Tim. And I believe this is another question for you as well, Tim. Manesh is asking, how do you insulate with upstream and downstream systems while using multi-cloud?
Sure. When you insulate or you're deprecating your insulation of basic upstream or downstream, depending on the platform and implementation. So for example, if you have a multi-cloud Kubernetes environment or using something like OpenShift, you can set various network policies at the pod level to diminish the access and the entitlement and the ingress of that data from a source to destination. Without speaking clearly of exactly what the downstream effect is, you also want to set some type of authorization to that actual data set. So if I'm sending a particular API or some transference of data, or I'm even just authoring different web layers, I want to make sure that I can authenticate with an encrypted or basically a user of some sort of entitlement between those two systems. So you enable the interdependency of the application, but you only entitle the data or the action to that destination endpoint.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Tim. Let's see. Here's a question. I believe this one's for you, James. Do you find changes in cloud technologies require large changes in how you implement cloud deployment? And how often do you need to revisit your deployment for changes?
We do see quite a bit of change happening between the different clouds. They all have different deployment methods. They all have their own built-in methodologies, for instance, cloud build or ARM templates in Azure. So quite a bit of difference depending upon how you're building your cloud. And then, of course, there's also intricacies between the different VM types, for instance, whether or not it's infrastructure as a service or not. Like we mentioned earlier, trying to go to a cloud agnostic as possible and using outside tools can help mitigate that quite a bit.
Nice. Okay. And then here's another question for you as well, James, from Bradford, who's asking, does the multi-cloud approach recommend the best possible cloud for each workload, including on-premises?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the advantages of multi-cloud. I mean, you have a couple different strategies when doing multi-cloud. One is like just being for a DR, but then they all have great features and advantages over each other. They all have different types of services that you can use. So depending upon exactly what kind of method, if you're building an application, you absolutely want to take a look at that. Each one has its definite pluses. What about you, Tim? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, what we see a lot in our industry is a lot of clients are utilizing specific services within each cloud or hyperscaler. For example, a lot of clients are running their data analytics within GCP, and their application or services are actually running on AWS, and their identity management is using Azure. So in that type of trifecta environment, you're taking full advantage of some of the core services within those within those hyperscalers, and to effectively deliver the best service for the best requirement. But that's a pretty common approach and something that we discuss with our clients on a pretty regular basis.
Excellent. Nice. And then here's another question from Bradford, who's asking if the Taos team is capable of perpetual reevaluation of all cloud workloads of an organization and continuously moving between various cloud providers. James, what's your take on that?
Absolutely. We're working in different clouds all the time, and honestly, the cloud is moving so fast that it takes a little bit to stay on top of everything. But dipping your feet across all three clouds and staying up abreast on all the latest information takes a little bit. And we take what we learn from, we have a client that's in Azure, and we go over to AWS, and we have those different experiences we take with us, and then we do broach the subject. Well, this workload is better served over here. These particular problems that you're having can be solved by using this other provider. It's a continuous process, always moving forward with the client as to meet their best needs.
Excellent. And then kind of a follow-up to that, is there some sort of Taos assessment tool to do cloud evaluations?
At this time, no. It's changing so fast, and each client has their own specific workload needs. We do not have a tool developed at this time. Maybe it's something we'll look into in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's see, here's another question. This one's for Tim. They're asking, what would you say as things to be cautioned for to implement IAM and integration with cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you implement any type of identity management system, you should have a really good sense of what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then silo the different dimensions of entitlement. So for example, you may have an operational perspective, you may have a user or end user access entitlement piece, and then you may have something separate to that, which is maybe more of an administration, something with managed services, maybe database related, something that's more of a level 1, level 2, and be able to understand the various dimensions of those roles. When you implement and automate the access and certification, there are platforms like open source tools like Terraform will allow for you to develop, let's say, for example, you're going into AWS, for example, and you want to spin up basically a Terraform role that provisions a particular set of entitlement that will allow for a set of users to deploy infrastructure, applications, etc. And that particular role could have a set of groups or users behind it that will give a list of users or a set of users access to perform that particular function. Also, when you implement any type of IAM strategy, you should be able to audit that particular strategy, ensure that each individual account is entitled provision or entitled correctly, and is provisioned and essentially is providing the type of access that's needed. Also, I would always suggest to any type of client is under provision access, never over provision, especially in the cloud platform. You never want someone to accidentally destroy or remove or deprecate some type of function and service without proper entitlement, essentially.
Very nice. Yeah, great point, Tim. Let's see. Next question here for you, Patty. They're asking, do you recommend getting executive teams like CEOs and CFOs involved in this process?
Absolutely. And in most cases, what we typically see is our CIOs and CTOs are very aware of the strategy and the plan. And so typically that raises up through that C-level organization. CFO obviously very involved in budgeting and the financials around what makes sense for the organization from a cloud perspective. CEO, it will always want to understand what the impact to the business is going to be, and how that is going to look from a bigger picture perspective. But I guess my recommendations would be is if you're just new to this cloud strategy, ensuring that again that you have a really good solid plan. Even maybe if you haven't taken it up to the CIO or CTO yet, have a solid plan. Think about what those costs are going to be, because at some point you will want to raise that up to the visibility of the CEO and the CFO.
Great advice. Thank you, Patty. Let's see. Next question for you, Tim. In a multi-cloud hybrid strategy, how is edge security handled for different mega cloud providers, and are they different for each private in-house cloud?
Sure. That's another good question, and one of the more complicated implementation strategies when you go multi-cloud. So for each hyperscaler, so for AWS, we'll speak with AWS, GCP, and Azure. Each cloud provider has its own strategy of how it manages the perimeter, or how it manages what we consider the VPC. What we advise clients, again, is to understand your entire enterprise across your cloud, what components are running inside, what type of access entitlement is needed, what is the application interdependency between the clouds, how is the data transported between the clouds, etc. So instead of looking at the parameter and going inside, we suggest is to build your application stack right inside, hypothetically, or in a reference architecture, and define your perimeter in that meaning build your stack, understand your requirements, and then define the perimeter at that point. With that said, as each individual hyperscaler has its own dimensions to its external or perimeter design, what we look at is there are a lot of third-party products out there, Zscaler, Proofpoint, etc., that provide basically that enterprise-wide strategy. So in the event of you may looking at some type of a hybrid model, there is also looking at Palo Alto Networks that have kind of a hybrid solution that gives you that perimeter, single pane of glass kind of strategy. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to audit and change and adjust your requirements to your possible vulnerabilities. When you look at any type of hybrid strategy, you have to incorporate your data center space or whatever your on-prem location looks like and extend that to the cloud. Don't extend the cloud to your data center, as you will find that you'll have a lot of incompatibilities with that type of strategy.
Okay. Very interesting. And then here's another question from Tico, who says, what are the key features to look for in a multi-cloud management platform? Who wants to grab that one?
I can take that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, James.
No, go ahead, Tim. You can take it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say if you're looking for key features in a multi-cloud management, is when you're looking at multi-cloud, look at the big picture. When you are looking at something like you want to run a multiple containered implementation across all three hyperscalers, start looking at native implementations, because of that gives you that ubiquitous approach to managing each individual cloud. So what I'm suggesting is people that look at native Kubernetes, platforms like OpenShift that give you that orchestration framework to give you the ability to deploy to all three clouds without utilizing each individual service. Now, if you are kind of new to Kubernetes and you want to implement something like EKS, GKE, inside their in clouds, you're going to find that you're going to have issues with identity management, security, certificates, etc. But at the end of the day, you want to have a good understanding of identity management. So I'd look at the key features there between the various hyperscalers, how they deploy and manage their containers. What I mean by that is where is that registered store? How do you store the containers? How are they deployed? What type of database platforms you're looking at? Are these open source or are these community versions that can be shared across each individual plane? Because you don't want to run into any type of incompatibility between DB parameter groups or any type of database engines, as well as looking what type of global routing availability you may have in between each individual hyperscalers. You will have to set up global routing in between the various hyperscalers to have interconnectivity. So understanding what your network topology is, how those are managed in the cloud, understanding how data is stored at rest, encrypted at rest, how you can manage the entitlement across those clouds, and the key features of how those entitlement and identities are managed and provisioned within each hypercloud providers. Those would be the key features I would look at before I look into any type of orchestration between multi-cloud scenario.
Okay. Excellent advice. Yeah. These are all great questions. I'm really loving all these questions from the audience. We've got a ton of them. So thank you, everyone. Next question from Eugene here. Is there a specific cloud you recommend for a specific type of data, and specifically around the context of security as well?
I can answer that one. I guess, there isn't, so that's a great question. First, there isn't one cloud sits above the rest. It all depends on what it is exactly you're doing. So let's talk about data analytics, data platforming, any type of data science type of strategy. I would argue, again, this is an opinion-based, feeling that I feel that GCP is a better platform for that type of environment. If I am managing MSSQL cluster databases, I would suggest that possibly Azure might be a better platform. Now, you can run that strategy in all three, but I would suggest from an entitlement perspective and the management of the data set in a clustered environment, Azure might be a better play. If you're using possibly, I would say just common MySQL, Postgres, those type of scenarios, you might choose AWS. But all three hyperscalers provide a very secure way of mechanisms to secure environment. Now, with that said, you have to be cognizant of the way that you're storing the data, how you transfer the data, how you encrypt the data, and how you store it, just like you would in any data center. So by and large, all three major providers provide the same type of functionality. It's what you want to do with it and what platform you're running.
Okay. Yeah, good advice. I know that's got to be a big question for a lot of folks when they look at these multi-cloud solutions. What cloud do I leverage for what? James, this one's for you. They're asking, will I have access to automation and provisioning?
Absolutely, depending upon your strategy. Oh, and yes, thank you. Very good question. Yes, depending upon your strategy, each cloud has their own automation provisioning system, but, going to agnostic to do a multi-cloud, to be able to deploy, you can take use of standard tools, going back to the agnostic, using Terraform, or Puppet or Chef or Ansible. You can provision those depending upon exactly what you're doing. And this is, of course, focused more on infrastructure as a service and not focusing on any of the real advantages of the cloud per se, with some of the built-in services. But absolutely, those are available to you. Thank you. Good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, another question. This one's for you, Tim. It's a very lengthy question. I'll see if I can kind of rephrase it. They say, as we go through this shift, it's a huge change how we think about network security, specifically secrets management. How do we move away from basically having credentials sprawled through our estate? He says, previously, if we had a web app and we wanted to talk to the database, credentials would be hard-coded. What do you recommend for that?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. That's a pretty common question for multi-cloud. There's a number of tools out there, Psychotic, HashiCorp's Vault. All of these secret servers appliances apply to a multi-cloud solution, so you can centralize that platform. The strategy that we try to advise clients on is possibly not centralizing all of your secrets into a single vault. look at each application layer or application stack to have its own vault. That way, all the secrets are isolated within each individual vault. So if, for example, somebody leaves their job, has access or would understand the various secrets that are stored, the keys, secrets, passwords, etc., in that particular vault, you've isolated or siloed that particular list of secrets, so to speak, in each application stack. But key management is something that should be really understood and addressed across the multi-cloud scenario. And I would always advise clients is to be a little more generic and looking for a third-party open source solution that is ubiquitous across the platform. So that way you have a single platform that shares across all three providers instead of integrating with a KMS solution provided by each hyperscaler.
Good point. Good point. Okay. Yeah, like you said, that's a big problem when companies move to the cloud is kind of secrets management. So it's great to know there's a lot of solutions available like that. I want to remind everyone about the poll question on the screen. We've just got a few minutes left here in our webinar, and make sure that you get your response noted there in the poll. We do appreciate that. James, next question for you. Mark is asking, is there really a cost savings using multiple cloud providers, or is it best to just pick one provider that has the best tool set to work with?
You know, that is a good question. And I would say probably not, because you're really looking at expanding your skill set in your environment to make sure that you can handle those multiple costs. And anytime, or multiple platforms, and anytime you start adding complexity to it, it starts to cost more. It really depends upon your strategy of why you're going to choose multi-cloud. And multi-cloud for me is really picking HA, making sure that, if one cloud goes down, you have another cloud as a backup. But it's also about picking the best services and the best functionality to really give you the biggest bang for the buck. And so, it depends upon your priorities. There is a potential, if you are able to find some cost savings in comparison to services, then yeah, you can go that route. But typically, you're not going to see much of a price difference between the cloud providers for a comparable service. They're pretty competitive with each other. Thank you. Good question.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. And then Tim, let's see, final question we probably have time for. They're asking, what are the factors to look out for with a startup with a strict budget? Anything that they should be on the lookout for when choosing the best cloud provider?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. One is understand what you want to do. As we mentioned in the video, what is your business objectives? As James had mentioned, each cloud provider has a very competitive pricing around the type of instances that are provided across the three major cloud providers. You can utilize what's called spot instances in AWS or reserved instances to reduce your cost, but also understand that if you have something you don't want to run, make sure you turn this off, deprecate those instances, remove those essentially. Don't over provision things or oversize your instance types. Understand what type of data you want to store, how much is out there, and also get a good handle of the type of data you're going to transfer to cloud. Most of the expensive or the higher pricing or the more costly services are the transference of data from on-prem or wherever your local source location is to the cloud. Understanding your architecture, diminish your cloud spend by only running things when you need them, and also ensuring that if you are going to install any type of auto-scaling componentry, set hard limits at that when you're testing that to not overscale your enterprise effectively and extend your bill.
Okay. Excellent advice. I know, smaller companies, especially getting started, they've got to prioritize things. Even large companies as well have to, know what to prioritize. So it's great to have a partner like Taos there to help advise on that. It looks like we're running out of time here in our webinar slot. This has been a great event, a great discussion, tons of questions. I want to thank our experts from Taos, Patty, Tim, and James. Thank you so much for being on the webinar today.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Awesome. And before we go, just one final question for you, Patty. If folks want to get started with Taos and modernizing using multi-cloud, what do you recommend?
You can go to our website at taos.com and request that we contact you, and we will reach out to you and understand how we can help.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you to the team from Taos, and thank you to our audience for tons of excellent questions. I'm afraid that's all the questions we have time for. We'll have to get back to the other questions electronically. We do appreciate those. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going to Michael Podlipsky from Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Michael Podlipsky from Pennsylvania. We'll reach out to deliver that prize, as well as contact our best question prize winner of the day. Again, thank you to everyone who joined us on the webinar today. For more information on the Taos solution, check out the handouts there in your audience console. And of course, also visit taos.com. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.